Kevin, thank you very much for having me on my show, Between Two Barrels, for making some time to have a chat. We are in this cathedral. Is this called the cathedral? This
correct.
Amazing secret place of Waterford. And just to have a chat a little bit about you. You are an icon of the South African wine industry, and I'm very curious to know how everything started. I believe you're from the Karoo, and you grew up on a horse farm. Is that true?
Yeah, we kind of bred horses and cattle and sheep, and we ran around in the Karoo, but I fell in love with Stellenbosch as a student. I never wanted to leave.
And you studied agriculture initially?
Initially agriculture, and then because I wasn't from the Western Cape, I wasn't allowed to study wine, so right. I had to be pretty successful in my first year, achieve high enough points to be allowed to study wine in my second year.
At Elsenburg?
Elsenburg,
top marks to get access at Elsenburg?
Yeah.
And once you've degreed at Elsenburg, you started working for Sperling, more or less?
Yeah, I fell in love with it as a student as wine. So my holidays, instead of going home to Plettenberg Bay, I used to work at Stellenbosch Farms Winery.
Yeah.
And in the laboratory doing research and blending. And my first job officially was Stellenbosch Farms Winery, which then became Distel. Yeah. But while I was on December holiday, I got a call from Sperling. And because I was the top student at Elsenburg, I got the job as assistant winemaker.
Amazing.
In 1979.
And that was at Delheim.
Delheim, yeah.
And from what I read, which was amazing, two things. So first of all, it took you only 2 years from assistant winemaker to become official winemaker at Delheim. And that was...
Yeah, it was... I didn't know. If I'd known that, I most probably would never have survived. But the winemaker was from Moosbach, under Rheinfels. And he didn't tell me he was going to leave after 1 year. So... he left, in 1980 he left, and I was alone in a 1,200 ton wine cellar.
Wow.
As a junior winemaker, and I had to take control of that.
Right, make it or break it. I mean, you learned by
experience
very
quickly.
In a crisis there.
But Spats was a good, wonderful guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was very fond of you. I mean, I read a quote saying that you, when it comes to red winemaking, and I assume also white winemaking, but specifically at the time, you had a magic touch. And I mean, that must have been quite incredible to hear something like this at a young age from such a legend of the wine industry. And you contributed, or you made the flagship wine of Delheim. That was the first. Correct. Then you followed on Rustenfrede.
Yeah.
Built their estate wine, and then so on. So I mean, iconic red wines. Where came that inspiration of creating icon wines?
Interesting question, but I always had sort of three mentors as a young winemaker. One was Spanish, one Italian, and the one was Californian. And I was fortunate enough to spend time with two. That was Robert Mondavi in California, physically working there with him. Piero Antonori has always been one of my legends that I'd followed in terms of wine styles. He also accepted an invitation and came and spent time with me at Waterford Estate. And we went on safari together, just the two of us. It was an incredible journey to gain from that experience.
Amazing.
And then it was the Torres family in the 1960s, 1970s produced a label, a blend of Cabernet and Tempranillo, which I really liked. So those were the kind of three inspirations, and obviously all red wine. So I always had a desire to do something that hadn't been done in South Africa before.
Amazing. I mean, families, I mean, you're talking about the great families of wine in the world. And so after your experience at Delheim, you started working at Rustenfrede, is that correct?
Yeah, I spent, I think, 11 years at Delheim, and Rustenfrede just started, so they were quite new. And I was the champion winemaker in South Africa in 1986, and in 1987 I moved to Rustenfrede because I wanted to specialize in red wine. Rustenfrede was the only property that only made red wine.
Right.
Meerlust made white and red in those days, but Rustenfrede was the only red wine specialist, so I joined them.
So, okay, so I will collect along the way a few keywords that I'm interested in, and one of this is focus now. So focus obviously on Rustenfrede, focus on red wine. The estate was the first wine ever making it in the top 100 of Wine Spectator.
Correct.
In 1998, I think.
Actually, we got one in 96, which is in my time. In 1998, I just left.
Right.
The wine was actually made by Dewald Heinz, who's from Sorensburg. Fantastic wine. But in my era at Rustenfrede, we made the first top 100 wine, blended red wine from South Africa.
So you really left an impressive mark along the way, everywhere where you were going. And then at some stage, end of the 90s, you decided now it's time to do my own thing, and that is when the project Waterford came to life. Is that correct?
Yeah, it kind of was a mixed bag of things. I was fortunate enough to meet Jeremy Ord from Dimension Data, not knowing that he would have any interest in wine. But I had rented a farm in this valley. I wasn't making a huge success of it because I didn't have winemaking facilities and also didn't have the cash flow to be able to invest heavily. So I was just farming and selling the grapes. But Jeremy indicated that he was interested in getting involved. And so the first project never got off the ground in Somerset West. And then when I realized that he was serious, I really started looking around to find something special. And being at Russenfrede for 10, 11 years, and as a student, I've always loved the Helderberg. It is something special about this area. Not only the soil and the winemaking, also the nature. So, and I knew about this property, but it wasn't for sale. So between Jeremy and myself, we kind of worked on it, and eventually we got it.
Amazing. I mean, that was a good bet,
I
would assume.
Very good.
And so you started your first vintage here?
So 1998, we bought the grapes from the previous owner. We only took ownership of the property after the harvest. But I didn't want to waste time. I knew that I had to build a brand very quickly. So I bought the grapes and I used my friends' cellars, Neil Ellis, Jan Kutsia, Frans Smith at Spear, Uwe Gau. They all helped me with cellar space to make wine in 1998. Right. And that's how we started the brand.
And was the first wine, or one of the first wines, is what we have in a glass now?
In 1998, we started with 3 wines, the Waterford Cabernet Sauvignon, Kevin Arnold Shiraz, and we started with a Sauvignon Blanc from the estate.
And you named, so just the anecdote, you named the Kevin Arnold Shiraz, every year has the name of one of your kids, or what is the...
Yeah, it's quite an interesting story.
I'll taste it in the meantime.
Yeah, Jeremy's criteria, cheers. Jeremy's criteria was that we had to become cash flow positive within 6 trading years. And I think being a winemaker, not a financial person, I was didn't really accept the challenges of looking at it financially. I just knew, I was confident that I would make it work as a winemaker because I had so much passion and so much belief in what I was doing, that we were going to be the first in doing something that nobody had been done before. So I backed myself, and to do that I had to start selling immediately. So we had to use this property, or the cellar, which was 450,000 bottle winery. We had to create, build and make the maximum volume each year and sell it within 12 months.
Wow.
So the only way I could do that was to use my name as a result of my 20 years in the industry and all the customer base that I had. I was never keen to put my name to a label. It's never really been my intention. But to make this work financially viable and be successful in terms of building a brand, fast forward, I used my name, and it worked.
And it worked out.
So it was like reverse psychology. So for every restaurant listing for Kevin Arnold Shiraz, they had to list 2 Waterford wines.
Right.
So to get the Kevin Arnold, they had to list a Waterford Cabernet and a Waterford Sauvignon Blanc. So we got into the restaurant business very quickly, and for the first 10 years, that's the only place we sold wine. We never sold retail, and we didn't supply anybody else. It was from the property and straight into to restaurants.
Obviously tied to, because you wanted, and something you've done masterfully, and I don't know if where you got the inspiration from overseas, but you mentioned also that Mondavi taught you it's not just about the wine, it's about the brand, the business. And I would like to add the experience. So by controlling those channels, those are channels where you can control the experience, the restaurant and your own farm, I suppose. So that's how you build the brand. Yeah,
I think I learned a lot in California, although it was possibly maybe too commercial in the sense that the number of tourists they get annually is way more than the whole of Cape Town gets. And that was just in the Napa Valley vineyards. But what I did know that in South Africa we had to create a home for this brand. So the home of the brand had to be something very tangible, had to be very personal, and it had to be driven by personality and what I call experiential experiences on the wine farm. And my interest in the bush, safari, nature brought together a whole combination of things that had never been done before. So we introduced a wine safari where we go and taste the wines in the vineyard with a guest. You can smell the soil, you can pick the grapes during harvest, you can hear the people pruning in the winter, and that's where you open the wine. So it's a sensory experience in the vineyards.
So we build memories.
It's building about memories. And so we also developed a marketing campaign. What's inside the bottle is the responsibility of us as winemakers, but actually the story we tell outside the bottle is as important to us as winemakers. So great brands are always about authentic stories, the real thing. And I think that's very important. So Waterford's courtyard was to draw people in to a fountain, to have the three senses, smell, taste, and sight, and to absorb that when you taste a glass of wine to remind you of where you are. So I think great wines are all about where they're grown, not necessarily always about where they're made.
Absolutely.
But to bring this all together in one building, which is your winery, is not easy. And that's why we've tried to keep everything as natural as possible at Waterford. We're not interested in sort of technology to take us to another level. We're interested in the real thing that makes great wine, and that's soil and climate.
And yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And with the next project after the Kevin Arnold, at some stage you introduced the Gem, which was, I think, named after your business partner.
Yeah.
And that you wanted to play at on the same stage of the great icon red blends or red wines of the world. Now, how did that come about, and where did you draw inspiration? And lastly, a question we discussed earlier before we started recording, but obviously Waterford is a champion in terms of hospitality, and once people arrive here, they get the full experience, and you get that iconic sensation and the building memories and associated with the brand. But how can you create an icon wine here, export it, and without the assistance of people visiting here, can you build a world-class brand outside from South Africa?
Yeah, it was a challenge. So I think the only way we can do that is through quality. So one can have the best marketing and the best packaging, but at the end of the day, it's what's inside the bottle. So I came about the idea because of this farm. These vineyards are very difficult in terms of the soil. We have 6 different soil structures.
Yeah.
There's not very much soil, so it's vastly different to Rustenfrede, which is almost a direct neighbor. Here we have mainly rock. And for that reason, I planted drought-resistant varieties from Tempranillo and Grenache from Spain, obviously Shiraz and Mourvèdre from the south of France, and then from Italy I chose Sangiovese and Barbera. And I wanted to combine these varieties because of the soil, number one, and more importantly I wanted to make a red blend that was true to the Waterford vineyards. Now, nothing had ever been done like that before, so it was a tremendous gamble and a huge risk to achieve this. But I was confident of the grape varieties because I had been involved in the research at the university for 10 years, tasting all the experimental wines every single year, and I had all my notes on every grape variety. So the varieties I chose, I was totally confident about that. But the wine didn't exist. Nowhere in the world could I go and benchmark a blend of the Gem. So we had a total of 11 different varieties. The most we've ever used is 9, and the least we've ever used is 6 or 7. But it's not about a recipe, and it's not about something that's the same every year. So we start with a clean slate, and what we look for is mouthfeel, texture, spice on aromatics, and length of finish. Absolutely. And if we fill those criteria, we bottle the wine. If we don't release the vintage.